Montana Territory, January 1883. The wind howled through the Bitterroot Valley like it had a score to settle. Tessa June Jacobs stood stiff in the snow, her boots half frozen to the porch boards of her uncle's ranch house. Her arms were locked around her ribs, breath fogging in sharp bursts. The cold bit through her wool coat and thin gloves, but she did not look away from the door that had been slammed shut on her. "You'll stay out there till you come to your damn senses," her uncle had barked. "You think you can spit on a good marriage arrangement and just walk free? You've embarrassed this whole family." She had said no. That was her crime. No to marrying a man twice her age with a temper and 3 dead wives behind him. No to being sold off like a prize cow. Tessa wasn't stupid. She had seen what became of women who said yes out of obligation, and she would rather freeze than live that life. Her teeth chattered hard as sleet began to fall, slicing sideways in the wind. She forced herself to keep standing, her pride stronger than her fear, until the world started to tilt and her knees buckled. A door creaked open down the lane. "Hey!" a voice called. Low and firm, touched with confusion. "What in hell are you doing out here?" Tessa lifted her head weakly. A man was walking toward her from the bunkhouse, broad-shouldered and tall, a sheepskin coat flapping behind him. His brown hair curled damp at his collar. He looked young, maybe 25, but carried himself like someone who had seen too much too soon. He reached her in 4 strides. "You were shaking like a leaf. Come on." Before she could answer, he unbuttoned his coat and swung it around her shoulders. His hands were warm, steady. Tessa blinked up at him. "I was told to stay out." He stared at the house, jaw tight. Then he looked back at her. "You defy a marriage you don't want and they throw you out into a snowstorm? That's not a family. That's a prison." He drew her gently toward the bunkhouse. "I'm not going to hurt you," he added, quieter now. "You need heat before your blood stops moving. That's all." She let him guide her. Her legs barely held. Inside, the bunkhouse was rough but warm. A fire crackled in the stone hearth and the air smelled like smoke and pine. He helped her sit on a bench near the flames and knelt to unlace her frozen boots. "What's your name?" he asked. "Tessa," she managed. "Tessa June Jacobs." He nodded once. "I'm Abram Keller." Her eyes lingered on his face now, clearer in the firelight. Strong features, a faint scar across his left cheek. He looked like he had fought for everything he owned. "You a cowboy?" she asked, voice thin. "Been one since I was 16, he said, setting her boots near the hearth. "Trail boss now. Got my own horse string. Drive cattle south in spring. I rent this bunkhouse from your uncle when I'm not out working." Had no idea he was the kind of man to leave a girl out in the ice. She lowered her eyes. "He said I humiliated him. Refused a marriage to a man named Edwin Crowley." Abram's shoulders stiffened. "Crowley? I know him. Mean as a rattler. Rich, though. That's probably what your uncle saw." Tessa didn't speak. She tucked her hands under her arms, trying to feel them again. Abram moved to the stove and poured hot coffee into a tin cup. He brought it to her, crouched down, and held it out. "You are safe here, Tessa. I won't let him drag you out again." Her hands trembled as she took the cup. "Why are you being kind to me?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then because I know what it's like to have no one stand up for you." She drank. The warmth hit her stomach and spread out. Her eyes burned. "You're not married?" she asked. He smiled a little, but it was sad. "No. Never found a woman who believed I was worth sticking around for." Tessa looked at him for a long moment. His kindness felt unfamiliar but safe. Her chest ached with the want to trust it. "Well," she said, voice soft, "you found one who might." His eyes flicked up to hers, surprised. Then a small, real smile pulled at his mouth. "You warm enough to lie down?" he asked gently. "You need sleep." She nodded, and he stood, pulling a wool blanket from the shelf. He laid it across a cot tucked beside the hearth. "You take the bed," he said. "I'll stay on the bench." "You do not have to." "I want to." Tessa hesitated, then stood and crossed to the cot. She eased under the blanket, the warmth already pulling her toward sleep. As she drifted off, she watched him move across the room, tending the fire, checking the door, keeping her safe. For the first time in weeks, her heart eased. She had stood in the snow alone, punished for saying no. But a cowboy had pulled her inside. And something in her, something stubborn and brave, whispered that maybe, just maybe, she had found the place she was meant to be. When Tessa woke, the fire was low and the light in the room had shifted. Pale morning crept through the single window, catching on the frost that feathered the glass. She sat up slowly, the wool blanket heavy across her legs, and looked around. Abram was at the far end of the bunkhouse, sharpening a draw knife by the window. He didn't turn when she stirred, but his voice found her. "There's biscuits and bacon on the stove. Coffee, too." She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and stood. Her limbs were stiff, but the ache in her chest had dulled, replaced by something quieter. She crossed to the stove, took a plate from the shelf, and ate standing, watching him work. He paused, set the knife aside, and finally looked at her. "How's your head?" "Still attached," she said. "Though I can't say the same for my pride." Abram leaned back against the window frame. "That'll come back faster than your toes did." She tried not to smile, but it caught the edge of her mouth anyway. "You always this gentle with strangers?" "I've known worse winters than this one," he said. "You learn not to leave folks out in no matter who they are." Tessa set her plate down and leaned on the counter. "Are you planning to stay here through spring?" He nodded once. "Until the river breaks. Then I'll ride south with the herd." She crossed her arms. "And until then? You just fix tools and drink coffee." His eyes met hers, steady. "I build fence, break colts, mend what needs mending. I don't care for idleness." Tessa glanced toward the door. "My uncle, he's not the sort to let things lie. He'll want me out one way or another." Abram didn't rush to respond. He picked up the draw knife again, turned it in his hands. "He's not welcome here. This room's mine till April, and I pay for it fair. If you want to stay, you stay. You take a risk for someone you don't know? This isn't about risk. It's about right." He paused. "But I do want to know you." Tessa looked down at her hands. "I was raised in Bozeman. My mother died when I was 11, and my father drank himself into the grave not long after. Uncle took me in, or maybe just wanted the money she left." She sat back against the wall, voice low. "I used to think if I kept my head down, I'd earn a place. But there's some things I won't bow to." Abram set the blade down. "I've worked for men like your uncle. They mistake fear for obedience. Think kindness is weakness." She lifted her eyes. "And you? I think the strongest thing a person can do is offer someone warmth when the world's gone cold." The words stayed between them, quiet but full. Tessa moved to the hearth and crouched, holding her hands near the coals. "Do you have family?" He shook his head. "Not anymore." She waited. When he didn't elaborate, she didn't press. Instead, she said, "If I stay here, I should help out. I'm not keen on being a burden." "You know how to ride?" he asked. "Better than most men." He gave a half nod. "Then I'll have you help with the colts. There's a roan gelding that needs soft hands." Her face lifted. "I'd like that." He moved toward the door and pulled on his coat. "I'll check the barn. Come when you're ready." She watched him go, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. The bunkhouse felt different now, not just warmer but steadier, like it had been waiting for her to give it purpose. She dressed in silence, wrapped her scarf tight, and stepped into the morning. The snow had stopped sometime in the night. Hills rolled out beneath a sky the color of tin, and smoke curled from the barn chimney. She followed the path he'd cut through the drifts, boots crunching with each step. Inside the barn, the horses stirred at her presence. Abram stood near a stall, the roan shifting restlessly beside him. "I thought I'd start with this one," he said, rubbing the gelding's neck. "Name's Flint." Tessa approached, slow and even, her hand out. Flint snorted once, then let her touch his jaw. "He's got more sense than he lets on," she said. "So do you," Abram replied. She didn't look at him, but her voice was steady. "I'm not afraid of work." "I know." The roan flicked his ears, and she stepped closer, murmuring something low and rhythmic. Abram watched her, arms crossed, the faintest crease in his brow. Tessa didn't need to look back to know he was there, solid as timber, letting her find her own way in. She had been cast out unwanted, shamed for standing up. But now she stood inside a barn, a horse breathing steady beside her, and a man who didn't ask her to be anything other than what she was. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she owed anyone an apology for it. By late February, the river remained locked under ice, but the light stayed longer in the sky. The snow had crusted over most mornings, breaking underfoot with a soft, brittle sound. Tessa had taken to waking early, even before Abram stirred, and feeding the horses while the bunkhouse stayed dim. She'd found a rhythm inside the quiet. Flint no longer flinched at her, and she was learning the feel of his stride beneath her as they walked the perimeter of the pasture Abram had wired in himself the previous fall. She wore an old oilskin coat he'd loaned her, patched at the elbow, and a scarf she'd knitted herself from leftover yarn found in a drawer. One morning, as she led Flint back to the barn, Abram was already there, hammering a new hinge onto the feed room door. She didn't speak right away, just leaned against the stall rail and watched him work. "I had a brother once," he said, not looking over. "Older by 3 years. Name was Elias." Tessa stayed still. The barn smelled of hay and old wood, and the cold clung low around their boots. "We signed on together with a driving outfit near Fort Benton. Buffalo hides first, then cattle. He was the one who knew horses. I was just trying not to get trampled." She stepped closer, her voice quiet. "Where is he now?" Abram straightened, brushing sawdust from his hands. "Buried along the Judith River. Got thrown from a gelding that wasn't ready. Broke his neck before I could reach him." She nodded once, slow. "I'm sorry you had to carry that." He looked at her then, eyes darker than usual. "You remind me of him, not in looks, in how you don't rattle easy." "I rattle plenty," she said. "Just not where folks can see me." He tilted his head a little, like he was deciding whether to say more. Instead, he reached for a canvas bag near the door and handed it to her. "Found these in town yesterday. Figured you might need 'em." She opened it to find a pair of winter gloves, lined with rabbit fur. Her breath caught. "I don't have coin to pay you," she said carefully. "I didn't ask for pay. I asked for help with the horses, and you gave it." She ran her fingers over the stitching. "Thank you." He nodded once and turned back to the door, adjusting the hinge with a slow, methodical twist. That night, a storm rolled in from the northwest. Snow beat against the bunkhouse windows, and the wind made the chimney moan. Tessa sat by the hearth, mending a tear in her skirt, while Abram carved something small from a block of pine. The fire threw shadows on the floor, long and flickering. She glanced at him, then away. "You ever think about leaving Montana?" she asked. "Once. After Elias died, I thought about going south. Maybe Texas. But there was nothing waiting for me there." She nodded slowly, threading her needle again. "I used to dream of Oregon. Saw a picture of the ocean once in a book. Thought I'd like to hear what it sounded like." His carving knife paused for a second, then resumed. "You still want that?" "I don't know anymore. Feels like every time I make a plan, someone else tries to shove me out of it. Maybe you just need someone to stand beside you when you make the next one." She didn't answer right away. The fire cracked, and outside, the storm deepened. "I never imagined I'd be here," she said at last. "Not just the bunkhouse. I mean, with someone who sees me as more than what I'm worth in cattle or land." He set the carving on the table. It was a small horse, rough but careful, its head bowed slightly. "I see you," he said. "Not for what you've got or what you've lost. Just you." She folded her hands in her lap. "I'm not easy. Carry things. Some of them heavy." "I don't mind heavy," he said. "As long as I'm carrying it with you." She looked at him fully then, and something in her face softened like snow melting on stone. "You sure?" she asked, voice low. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've known a lot of winters, Tessa. None of them ever made sense till you came through that door." Silence filled the space between them, deep and warm. She stood slowly, crossed the room, and sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed. The fire hissed as it settled deeper into the wood, and neither of them moved away. By mid-March, the snow began to rot around the edges, softening into slush beneath the cottonwoods. The river hadn't broken yet, but the signs were coming. Sap stirred in the trees, and the horses started to shed their coats in patches. Tessa found herself waking with energy she hadn't felt since childhood, like her body was remembering what it meant to belong somewhere. One afternoon, she came in from the pasture with her braid windblown and her hands streaked with dust from working flint in the round pen. Abram had brought in fresh-cut pine and was planing the edges of a new saddle rack by the hearth. "You ever think of starting your own spread?" she asked, pulling off her gloves and hanging them near the stove. He brushed sawdust from his sleeve. "I've thought about it. Takes a stake, though. Land, timber, fencing, stock adds up fast." She crouched beside the stove, turning her palms toward the heat. "I've been thinking about what I'd do with a place of my own. Nothing grand. Just enough pasture for 3, maybe 4 horses. A garden. A table long enough for someone to sit across from me and not want to leave." He set the plane down and wiped his hands on a rag. "That sounds like something a person builds slow and on purpose. I'm tired of being at other people's mercy," she said, looking up at him. "I want something with roots, even if I have to dig them in myself." He crossed the room and leaned against the window frame. "If I said I wanted the same, would that scare you?" "No," she said, "but I'd want us both to mean it. I don't deal in half promises." She stood and walked over to where he stood. Outside, the wind was pulling at the trees and a hawk circled wide over the ridge. "I used to think I had to take whatever I could get," she said. "That love, if it came, would be something you survived, not something you grew." He looked down at her, eyes unreadable. "And now I think maybe I was wrong." He reached for her hand then, rough fingers curling around hers. "If we put our names together, we could claim a parcel west of here. There's land near the foothills. Good grazing. Enough spring water to start again." Her breath caught. "You've thought this through. Since the day you stepped inside this place." She didn't speak for a long moment. Her thumb brushed the edge of his palm. "I don't have anything to bring but my hands and what I know about horses," she said. "That's more than most men bring to a marriage." Her eyes searched his face. "I don't want to be beholden." "You wouldn't be," he said. "You'd be equal." The words settled into her chest like a stone in still water. "I want to see that land," she said, "before we make any decisions. I'll ride you out there tomorrow. It's a half-day west near a cottonwood grove. Then we'll see," she said. That night, they didn't speak much. But when he passed her a plate at supper, their fingers brushed and neither of them pulled away. In the dark, after the fire had gone low, she lay in the cot and listened to his breathing from the bench across the room. Steady. Familiar. Not a man who needed to fill space with noise. She closed her eyes and let the thought come fully for the first time. She was no longer surviving someone else's future. She was standing at the edge of her own. And he was there, waiting with her. The next morning, they rode out before the sun had fully crested the mountains. Abram led the way, his saddle creaking in rhythm with his gelding's steady gait, while Tessa followed close behind on Flint. The trail west was narrow and worn, climbing through pine and alder where patches of snow still clung to the shaded ground. They didn't talk much, but the quiet between them felt settled, like the space between pages in a well-read book. By midday, the trees thinned, and the land opened into a broad sweep of meadow nestled against the foothills. A shallow stream wound along the edge, its banks lined with dormant willows. Beyond, a stand of cottonwoods rose like silent sentinels, their bare branches reaching toward the pale sky. Abram dismounted first and tied his reins to a crooked fence post left from some long-abandoned claim. Tessa swung down beside him, brushing her gloves together to shake the dust loose. He turned toward her. "This is the parcel I've been watching. Belongs to no one far as I can tell. Closest homestead's over a mile south. Water's clean. Soil's black under the snow. We could build here." Tessa walked to the stream and crouched, dipped her fingers into the cold trickle. Then she straightened slowly and looked around. The wind tugged loose strands of her hair across her cheek. "I never thought I'd get to choose the place I'd put down roots," she said, let alone share it with someone who'd let me stand beside him. Abram stepped beside her, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over his eyes. You wouldn't be beside me. You'd be in it with me. Every stone, every board, every hoofprint. She turned to face him fully. Then it's yes. If you'll have me. He took her hands, gloveless now, and wrapped his around them. I've been waiting for you longer than I realized. They kissed then, not tentative, not searching. It was a kiss that spoke of long winters endured and the promise of softer days ahead. The kind of kiss that settled both heart and bone. They spent the next weeks preparing. Abram filed a land claim under both their names at the county office in Missoula, and Tessa bartered her old riding boots for a second-hand cook stove from a widow moving east. They made supply runs together, hauling back nails, canvas, seed sacks, and a new bridle for Flint. She learned to read a ledger. He learned to eat her sourdough biscuits without complaint. By the time the river finally broke loose and the ice roared downstream, they'd built the cabin's frame with their own hands, each beam set in place with care. The bunkhouse stood empty now, though Abram still paid the last of the rent to her uncle out of principle. They hadn't seen him since the thaw, and neither one spoke his name. They married under a cottonwood just as the buds were breaking open, the world greening around them. The preacher from the mill road came on horseback, and the only witnesses were a pair of crows and the mountain wind. Tessa wore a calico dress with a patch over the hem, and Abram shaved for the first time in weeks. Her voice didn't tremble when she said yes. His hand didn't waver when he slid the silver ring over her finger. Spring moved into summer, and the days grew long and golden. They worked side by side in the garden, Tessa with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, Abram with sweat darkening the back of his shirt. They planted beans, potatoes, squash, and a row of lilacs along the cabin's southern wall. One evening, as dusk settled soft over the hills, Tessa brought 2 mugs of coffee out to the porch where Abram sat sharpening a bridle buckle. She handed him a cup and sat beside him, their knees touching. Next year, she said, I'd like to build a chicken coop, maybe get a milk cow. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. And after that? I haven't gotten that far yet, she said. But I know one thing. What's that? She leaned her head against his shoulder. I want to raise a child here. One who grows up knowing they were wanted. His hand found hers, thumb brushing the place where her pulse fluttered. Then we'll build that life too. She looked out across the land they'd claimed together. The cottonwoods rustled in the breeze and the fields stretched wide and full beneath the setting sun. There were no fences holding her in anymore. No walls she hadn't helped raise. Just the man beside her and the life they were shaping with each choice, each shared breath. Years later, that land would hold more than just their footprints, rows of corn. A weathered swing, a child's laughter echoing through the trees. But for now, it held the quiet kind of joy that came from knowing you had survived the worst of it and come out whole. And in that quiet, with her hand in his and their future laid out like open pasture, Tessa could finally rest. She was home,